Um, Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this year's final Idea Chats. I would first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I am on today, the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and would like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person watching. I would also like to acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So today I have with me Fiona Macdonald, who I'm very excited to be interviewing. Thank you for joining me, Fee.
Thanks so much, Greg. It's great to be here. And also, I'm joining from Boonwurrung country, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Perfect. So we'll get straight into it. So question one is, what is your name, pronouns, and what is your current title, and how long have you been in diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so my name is Fiona Macdonald, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm currently the Group Diversity and Inclusion Lead at ANZ. So that's the kind of enterprise role, and I've been in that role at ANZ for 6 years now.
Perfect. I should sort of preface with the reason that I'm interviewing Fiona is because within December, there's quite a few dates that are discussion points we've already talked about. So there was World AIDS Day on the 1st of December, International Day of People with Disabilities on the 3rd of December, and the other one is the 10th. Come on, Greg. It is. I had it up before. International Day against. Oh, Human Rights Day, that's right, which is on the 10th of December, which commemorates the adaptation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So today, Fee and I are going to be talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion within businesses. Okay, so question number two. What is the biggest change you've seen within diversity and inclusion recently?
Yeah, it's a really tough one because diversity and inclusion is such an ever-changing area. But for me, I think one of the things I've really seen a shift in is a greater focus on data and measurement, which has been really great to see and really kind of moving towards focusing on impact. And so I think a lot of times, there's a great Boston Consulting Group report actually that just talked about there doesn't seem to be the same discipline around measuring impact in diversity and inclusion initiatives as there are in other business initiatives. And so I definitely am hearing more and more about we need more data.
Yeah.
We're in the process of implementing a new HR system, so trying to work out what are the opportunities to collect more data. And so I think, yeah, for me, this kind of a stronger focus on really making data-driven decisions and people really wanting to measure impact, which is fantastic to see. Data isn't exactly my sweet spot, but it's part of the learning curve.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I remember when I sort of started in this role, someone was like, well, how do you measure inclusion? And it's sort of one of those things of like, it is quite a difficult area to actually find like what sort of data you need to collect in the first place. But it's also like, there is obvious ways to measure it in terms of like, will you see people in being like feeling included more and actually involving themselves within stuff? But then how do you actually measure that to what you've done? And so
Yeah.
it's that data that needs to be collected, but a lot of people don't even know what data to start with, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm assuming your colleagues being scientists are pretty similar to my people being finance, where, it's all about the data and the numbers, and that's the language they speak. So,
Yeah.
we've done a lot of work to try and get better at understanding the representation of the diversity of our workforce, but then also the experience. So we've sort of got a belonging question, or we've got a couple of measures that we actually now have an inclusion index in our engagement survey. So there's some ways in which we are trying to get to the bottom of that and understanding then how different groups experience the bank in different ways.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know. Okay, so question number three. What have you seen is the biggest misconception of diversity and inclusion?
So this is a great one. I would say the biggest misconception is that there are still, unfortunately, a significant number of people who think it's political correctness or even just the right thing to do. I still think there aren't enough people that really understand the business benefits of diversity and inclusion and all the research that shows that inclusion's good for business, that it
Yeah.
leads to higher employer engagement, higher, stronger, financial performance, productivity, increased innovation. There's more and more research demonstrating this kind of tangible financial results of inclusion, and
Mm.
also that it's really good for individual well-being as well. So I still think that's the misconception, that it's, either you have the people on the extreme saying it's political correctness gone mad, or even the people that might be supportive but just think it's because it's the right thing to do without actually understanding, there are really important business benefits as well.
Yeah. Like for me, I still find a lot of people think it's just like a box ticking exercise as well. Do you know what I mean? Like that's one of the things that I struggle with. Like a lot of the time it's sort of like, yes, we do have to do these things because we've got KPIs in place, etc. But that's not also the reason that we're doing it. Like yes, the measurables are good, but it's one of those things of like, but by doing this, we're actually benefiting, as you said, like the whole business. And I think a lot of people sort of also tend to forget that just because certain things don't apply to you doesn't mean they like you won't find the benefit of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes people need to experience it as well. And so I think there's that sort of great idea that, it's any change, it's kind of any kind of change and transformation, you're going to get people that resist it.
Hmm.
But I think trying to kind of make sure that you're explaining it in ways, because different people kind of absorb and take on information differently.
Yeah. Okay. So question number 4. What do you find rewarding about working within D&I?
So I started my career as an employment lawyer.
Hmm.
And so for me, working in a far more proactive, positive space is one of the things that I find most rewarding about working in diversity and inclusion.
Mm.
So working as an employment lawyer, often you kind of dealt with the negative, where there isn't inclusion. For example, it could often be quite reactive. And so I just find it really fascinating being on the other side of things, where you actually have the ability to be proactive and affect change as well.
Yeah. So,
Um, no, I was just going to say, also just getting to understand, like I'm a really curious person. And so just understanding more about different people. I mean, one of the reasons I became an employment lawyer was I just find all the different jobs people have really interesting, all the different things that make the world go round. And so for me, just having this opportunity to be working in an area that I'm always learning new things,
mm.
that's another part of it that I find really rewarding.
Yeah, I think it's nice that now you're sort of at the front end of trying to make sure that like things don't end up with an employment lawyer. Do you know what I mean? Like
Exactly. Yeah,
you're trying to
prevention is better than cure.
exactly. Um, I think like the biggest thing for me is still those like aha moments. Like, when you see people and you're delivering something and you just notice that it finally like clicks and you can tell when you've gotten through to someone. And it's just such a wonderful thing to sort of see that change within someone's like mentality. And it's one of those things that you can like every time it happens, it's still like I get a bit like, oh, that's super cute.
Yeah, and it's just nice to be able to make changes that actually have a material impact on people.
Yeah.
So earlier this year, we introduced gender affirmation leave at ANZ, which
Hmm.
I know particularly the education sector has been a lot more advanced than the big corporates in that space. And, the number of people that reached out to me, kind of internal and external to ANZ, talking about, how much it means to see a big organization introduce something like that.
Yeah,
They're the days that make you think, gosh, like this is the best job in the world.
exactly. Okay, so question number 5. This one's a bit of a sticky one, possibly. So one of the words that's been discussed recently within D&I is intersectionality. Um, do you think people really understand it, or do you see just a lot of people using it as a buzzword?
There is a lot of confusion around what intersectionality means. I actually was at a conference once where someone asked something about intersectionality and then the person answered misunderstanding, thinking they were talking about intersex status. So yeah, I think there's a great deal of confusion, but I think if you sort of unpick it, so intersectionality is just the ways in which different aspects of someone's identity interact to create patterns of oppression. So one of the most commonly discussed examples of intersectionality I'll describe, is often that so-called bamboo glass ceiling, which refers to the particular challenges or discrimination experienced by Asian women in the workplace. And so I think that's I think one that a lot of people can get their heads around of, Asian women don't just experience the glass ceiling of being a woman, don't just experience the bamboo ceiling of being Asian. They've kind of got the double ceiling.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really what intersectionality is about. No one actually fits just into one box. We've all got a number of aspects of our identity which play out differently. And I actually recently read this really powerful book that it was really changed my perspective quite a lot, which was called Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria. And that analyzes how really feminism has been very much the kind of domain of upper middle class white women, and they often kind of hog that sphere to the exclusion of people of color.
Yeah.
And actually it just feeds into this kind of cultural superiority. And so I think that's kind of a really good example of not taking, the negatives of if you don't take an intersectional approach, that by just focusing on one box, you're excluding other people.
Like, because I find this one a bit tricky because a lot of the time, like I've heard it so often recently, and it's the difficulty of how people sort of started out with looking at women. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then now it's sort of like, oh, if you're a woman of color, therefore you're in this intersectionality box. So it's still they're trying to put people into quite defined areas, which is sort of the the complete opposite of what intersectionality discusses, because it's sort of like every person has a different intersectionality approach to things, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like, just because you're a woman of color doesn't mean your like experience has been the same as like another woman of color. But it's sort of, I feel that's where people are trying to use this word at the moment, which is then really
so it's
difficult.
actually, I know what you mean, that it's just creating yet another box when actually we're saying, no one actually fits neatly into any box, no matter how broadly you define the boxes. I think the main thing from my perspective when we sort of talk about intersectionality at work is just making sure that we're not being too narrow, and that you're acknowledging that you can't possibly be representing all experiences. So we just launched our new accessibility plan on Friday. And I think disability is a great example where, it's very hard to get input from the lived experience of all different types of disability. And so you need to be really careful that if you do have a working group you're testing with, they're only contributing from their own experience of their own disability, and that they can't be seen to be representing all, or and we talk about that a lot in terms of our Indigenous voice as well, that there's no one person that can represent all the various Indigenous communities and cultures and histories. So just sort of just always sort of being really conscious that there are so many different experiences, and the more narrow you are, you define things, the more people you're excluding.
I think that's a good way of putting it. And that's the thing, like hopefully the intersectionality becomes the understanding that it just means like everybody in the broadness of what everybody has, and not trying to target specific things, I guess. Okay, so question number 6. So for people in leadership, what is the most important thing to realize to be an inclusive leader?
I don't know if I can pick just one thing. So I think there are two kind of, there are so many important parts of it, but I think the first one for me is about educating yourself. So, you need to do the homework and not put kind of cultural load on other people. So I think doing your homework and educating yourself would be the first thing. And if you are going to try and, because there's a fine line between genuinely wanting to learn more about the experience of people in your team, so understanding their experiences or their concerns, and there's a fine line where that tips into actually a cultural burden, and them having to sort of share kind of inappropriately sort of share personal experiences. So I think the first thing is doing your own homework so that you're better equipped to actually have those conversations with people in your team. And that kind of partly comes with acknowledging potentially your own privilege as a leader as well. And then to that point, we were just saying, kind of also recognizing that if you are speaking to someone in your team who might be from sort of a marginalized or underrepresented group, they're not representative of everyone in that group as well. So I think for me, the first one's about educating yourself. And then the second one is, it's always so powerful for a leader to be role modeling the inclusive behaviors you expect of the rest of the team. And I think that's the other thing, is that, yes, leaders are absolutely critical, but I also think sometimes we will put too much onus on the leader. And so if you think as an employee in a team, of course, your line manager and your leader has a huge role to play, but actually your experience of your peers and colleagues, is almost equally determining how included you feel as well. So I think the line manager should really be role modeling the behavior, but you can't underestimate the importance of everyone demonstrating those behaviors.
Yeah. It was quite interesting. In my last interview, I was talking about the fact that, like, in this day and age, there is so much information to be accessed quite easily, but it still, like, can be quite difficult for people from marginalized groups that still get asked questions because people sort of don't think they know where to start. But it's like, but that can be exceptionally detrimental for that person, but also for even just your broad knowledge of something. Do you know what I mean? Like, going back to intersectionality, obviously, like, if you ask just one person, then go, okay, cool, I know about, like, like, if someone asked me a question, they're like, oh, I know everything about queers now. It's like, no, you've asked one person, and everybody's perception of things is completely different. So, yeah, I think a lot of people also don't realize it's not like a final thing. It's sort of like, no, you have to continually educate yourself and read things, and there's so much out there to digest always, that it's not just trying to go, okay, I understand this section now, I'm totally fine.
And it's the context as well. I mean, there are so many times where people from particular groups, it varies, right? So at the moment, all of the discussion around, the voice, there's a particular time, or during marriage equality, or, there are different times. So it's kind of, the context will keep changing. So if you only understand one thing at one point in time, you're not understanding the kind of the experience that someone has given the broader context in society at a point in time as well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So question number 7. So when you started within D&I, what did you find was the biggest hurdle you faced personally?
So the biggest hurdle I faced was just recognizing how much I didn't know, and kind of getting comfortable with that. And that, as I said, I started out as an employment lawyer and, had been doing that for many, many years. So I felt very confident and comfortable with my expertise. And so I think moving into this space, that one was kind of changes very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And I had a lot to learn, but also being really conscious. And I think that's a great fear that a lot of people have, is that the impact of saying the wrong thing can have on people. And so I think that's really helped me understand the barriers that a lot of people experience of being so scared to say the wrong thing they say nothing.
Yeah.
And so I sort of talk about that a lot, actually, about you need to you need to create a safe space for people to learn so that they can become allies, and that you can, for people to, so long as they can demonstrate good intent, that you can create that safe space for people to learn and try to do better.
And that's one of the biggest things that I've always told people. It's like, along the way, you will stuff up. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of us do, like, because once again, things are ever evolving. And I think it's that having that understanding of if you do stuff up, just how to deal with it as well. And not putting it all on yourself, like, so that the other person that you might have offended has to apologize to you. Like, because I've seen that a lot of the times with people getting pronouns wrong, and someone's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, blah, 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 blah. And the person has to be like, no, it's fine. But then it's putting the onus back on the other person to not feel like, to make you feel comfortable as opposed to the other way around. And I think a lot of people have that little bit of learning to do, that sort of like, just say sorry and move on.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so question number 8. What is one of the smallest / easiest things that people can do in their life to make them more inclusive?
This is, I mean, how simple do you want to get? But for me, it is as simple as treating each other with courtesy, dignity, and respect. And that is easier said than done for some people, but I really genuinely believe that that is what creates the psychological safety that you need to create an inclusive workplace. And that you also need to be able, to what we were just saying before, to be able to safely make mistakes so that people can learn.
Yeah.
Because not, as you said, not everyone's going to always get it right. But I think that whole treat people like you would want to be treated, that's kind of the first and foremost, but also the next step. So once you've kind of got that that's like the absolute, bottom.
Basic.
But then the next bit is, just, do some reading on how to become an ally. Understand how you can create space for other people. And that's what I mean about not always needing to be the people leader. So if you have someone that often doesn't speak up, you might want to invite them into the discussion, or if you notice that someone always gets talked over, you could say, oh, Greg, I noticed, what were you going to say, Greg? Of just getting them into the conversation if they're someone that always gets talked over, although I'm sure that probably doesn't happen to you or me.
Nobody needs to do that for me.
But just things like that, of just that's how you can be a good ally to people, is actually not talking for them, but creating the safe space for them to have the opportunity to participate as well. I mean, obviously not everyone, some people don't speak up because they don't want to, but I think particularly that one where there's a lot of research that shows different groups that get spoken over in meetings, for example. And if you do see something, there's a lot about being that kind of bystander as well. And because often in any form of discrimination, there's a significant power gradient between the two people. And so sometimes just even backing the person or calling it out, or, there's a great article from Harvard Business Review about calling in rather than calling out. So, if you call out someone, you're kind of shaming them and judging them, and you don't necessarily get the right outcome. But calling someone in, of just, whether it is someone, whether it's intentional or not, that you could pull them aside later and say, oh, I noticed that you did this or did that, and actually creating it as a learning opportunity. And if you, as someone with some privilege, can do that so that someone more marginalized doesn't have to do that, I think that's quite an easy thing to do as well.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things for me, like I was talking to someone about this a little while ago, is also just trying to understand, like, trying to build a mindset that not everybody's like you. Do you know what I mean? Like, breaking that whole, so say with my upbringing, like, I sort of take things for granted. And then, like, going into certain instances, I'm like, oh no, but this is easy, and that's for me. And it's one of those things of like, try to remember that, yeah, not everybody's had the same experiences that you have, to try and sort of stop yourself from just assuming that everybody can do what you do. And I find that, especially within D&I, because obviously I've been talking about it for, I don't know, as long as I've been around, before I even had a name, like understanding that everybody's on a different path with this as well. So like if I spout out an acronym sort of thing and people are like, what does that mean? Having to go, oh yeah, that's right, not everybody's at where I'm at. And that's sort of one thing that I have to continually do, to like just generally. And it's not that difficult once you sort of get into the habit of it, but it's just getting into that habit to begin with.
Yeah, it does. And that's a huge part of bias as well,
Yeah.
of, you know, one, you kind of assume people have the same experience as you, and often you end up surrounded by people that do actually have the same experience as you. So it can be quite confronting when you do get reminded that actually that's not the majority of people.
Yeah. But just in little instances, like I think it's quite important to remember that just from like little things. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I was having a chat with someone and they had sort of a difficult childhood. And so then they looked at everybody else who would deal with certain levels of things and be like, oh, I don't know why this is an issue. And it's like, oh, well, you've had to like deal with a lot here, whereas that person hasn't. So it sort of
Yeah.
can go both ways as well. Okay, so question number 9. What is the best piece of advice you've been given within your career?
That's a tough one. I would say that I often get caught up in my own head and have a very deep sense of justice. So
Hmm.
I find that really challenging. And I remember when one of my colleagues took me aside and took me through that Stephen Tovey circles of influence and control. So you've got what can you actually control, which is like not much.
Yeah.
What can you influence, which is here. And what are your areas of concern, which are here. And I'm always up here. And then actually go, no, like, yes, that's awful and it's unjust, but actually you can't control or influence that.
Yeah.
And then you go down. And then if you actually just really focus all your energy on what you can actually control, or next what you can influence. So I think that's been the most impactful career
Yeah.
advice. And actually I use it like both, whether it's in career or at home, but I do have a tendency to be focusing up here, and then you just go round and round and
Yeah.
start to spiral. So I think that kind of really focusing on where can you affect change, where can you add value, and also are there particular things that you're uniquely placed to do. I find that kind of really helps me, instead of trying to solve everyone's problems and battle everyone's battles.
Yeah, I think that's something that I need to look at then.
Yeah.
I think one of the best pieces that I got was a few years ago, and it's just like it just simplified what diversity and inclusion is. It's like, well, diversity should just represent society. Do you know what I mean? Like, because that's what it is. Like, and I think that was sort of one of those things where you're just like, oh, yeah. Like, so it was when I was working in the advertising agency, it was like, well, what you see in your workplace is hypothetically should be what you see outside. Do you know what I mean? But that's sort of not usually the case.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about sort of representing the market we serve.
Yeah.
And that's, I think it can be really helpful to sort of, obviously not all diversity is visible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that can be really helpful.
Pardon me. Okay, and question number 10, our last question, which is probably the most difficult. How do you stay abreast of all things D&I?
Oh, it's really, it's just a lot of reading and connecting. So it means that I'm often on my phone more than I probably should be, because I just sort of feel like I follow so many different newsletters and different things on social media, or, there are lots of different interesting events and webinars, or whether it's through the Diversity Council or a whole range of other providers as well. So sort of trying to find that, I think it's more about how do you find that right balance, because there's
Yeah.
always going to be a lot. And then just, I think, like the two of us, having those peers in the, that do
Yeah.
the work and sharing experiences and challenges. And I think that's also, often, of course, we all share the kind of celebrations and good news, but I think often it's actually more powerful sharing, the challenges and maybe what hasn't worked as well, so that not
Yeah.
everyone's going around and making the same mistakes.
I think that's what I found probably the most beneficial is literally just having that network around to share stuff with. Because it obviously then lightens the load for everybody. It's sort of like you talk about something to be like, oh, I'll flick you the article through. Because it's also that difficulty of, yes, there are a lot of avenues to take information in, but then how much do you have to then go back and check what is correct or like where it's come from, sort of stuff. Like I know a lot of the time, like I'll see stuff pop up in a news article, read through it, and then like Google it again to be like, oh no, this is actually correct. It's not just someone else's opinion on something. Whereas a lot of the time I find if people share stuff throughout my network, they've sort of vetted it beforehand as well. So it's not like having to do all the work just
Yeah, it's not as
yourself.
onerous as yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
And or like someone summarizes something and you're like, okay, cool, that's good to know, but I don't need to know the whole thing because it doesn't specifically apply to what work I'm doing or something. So it's, yeah, I think trying to just have conversations around stuff and also then at least it does spark sort of other things. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if this will probably happen to you as well, but the amount of times that someone will mention something and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll Google it, leave the web page up on my phone to read later.
Yes. You don't want to know how many tabs I have open at any point in time.
I know I'm the same. It's usually like 60 on my phone and about 40 on my computer, and I'm like, yeah, I'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Fee. It's been really lovely. And to all of the Teamos team, thank you for a wonderful year, and I'll be talking to you in January.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much for
Fee.
having me. Bye.
Bye.